In the first half, we're fighting the algorithm of Intransient Matrix. The main mechanic with this boss is that it turns invisible every other move starting with its first move, and we have to trigger a quicken reaction against it to break its invisibility. One thing I like to do before it goes invisible is to mark it with a debuff with something like a 4-piece VV or Deepwood set, so that these little debuff symbols appear around it. These debuff symbols persist even when it goes invisible, so you can effectively use them as a tracker to quickly find where the boss is. You can also mark it with a few other things like Nahita's skill or Hu Tao's blood blossom, just to give a few examples. Once we've tracked its location, we use Dendro and Electro to trigger Quicken and break its invisibility. Also note that it has extremely high resistance while it is invisible, so that kind of discourages us from brute forcing our way through this phase. The other way to break its invisibility is to destroy the constructs that it summons just before it goes invisible. They do have quite a bit of health, and critically, you can't trigger reactions against them, so characters that deal high mono element damage like Raiden, Itto, Xiao are better suited for breaking these. Once you do break them, the boss will still be invisible, but it enters a repair state where some of its parts become infused with Dendro. This effectively gives us the Dendro half of the Quicken reaction for free, so in this case, we just need to apply Electro to trigger Quicken and break its invisibility. After we break it out of its invisibility, we have this vulnerability window where we can deal most of our damage. When it gets up, it'll use one out of a few possible attacks, but none of them are really a big threat. I'd say the most annoying one is actually this wall attack that pushes you away just because it ends up wasting a lot of your time. So regardless of which move it uses, I usually run behind it just in case it does choose the wall attack. After using one attack, it'll go invisible again, and it just repeats this cycle of going invisible and then attacking once, going invisible, attacking once, and so on. Given this attack pattern, one important thing you need to do is manage your rotation timings accordingly. Ideally, you should be just wrapping up your rotation right as it summons these constructs, and you can start your next rotation after you break its invisibility again. The boss's cycle of going invisible and attacking once, and then going invisible again, takes around 40 to 45 seconds. So if you can maintain a consistent 20 or 22 second rotation, you can squeeze in about 2 rotations in between each time it goes invisible. In terms of DPS thresholds, you really don't want to spend more than 4 rotations on this boss. The fight starts at around 950, and assuming you go through 2 cycles of its 45-second attack pattern, that leaves you at around 820 to clear the second half, which is doable but still pretty tight. If you can get your DPS up to the point where you can clear this boss in 3 rotations, which lands you at around 835 or 840, that's probably where I would say you can 3-star this chamber much more comfortably. Going into the second half, we're fighting 2 waves of enemies, but actually it's more like fighting 3 waves, and you'll see why in just a little bit. The first wave is 3 Eremites, which are relatively easy to group fortunately. They still can get separated because of their dashing attacks, so really try your best to catch those stragglers. Always focus on the one that has the most health, and let your AoE damage handle the weaker ones. The key is strong AoE damage and strong grouping, which means Sucrose is highly recommended here if you don't have Kazuha or Venti. The second wave is where things get a lot more interesting. We're fighting 3 Eremite summoners, and they've modified them so that they summon their pets immediately when they spawn rather than at that 70% HP threshold. The problem with this is that they can't be CC'd while their pets are alive, and they're all ranged, which means none of them will walk towards us either. This effectively means that there's no good way to group these enemies during this initial phase. Fortunately, their pets are a lot easier to group because they do use some melee attacks, and when we do defeat a pet, its summoner loses a big chunk of her HP, becomes stunned, and most importantly, becomes susceptible to CC again. So naturally, the strategy here is to group and focus down the pets first, and then once all 3 pets are down, we can group the Eremites and finish them off. Both the Dendro Viper and the Anemo Bird will use ranged attacks, so I recommend focusing one of those 2 first and let your AoE damage handle the Pyro Scorpion. Now this plan sounds fine and dandy at first, but when you go and try to execute it, you will quickly find that these enemies do a lot of damage, especially when their attacks start to combo with each other. The burning and swirl reactions will just shred through your health really quickly. And one attack that I found is also a big threat is this missile attack from the Pyro Eremite Summoner. She fires 4 missiles in a row, so if you get hit by just the first one, you end up getting stagger locked by the next 3 hits, and it leaves you vulnerable for a pretty long window. So always keep your eye out for this one, and as usual, do your best to dodge and iframe all the AoE attacks. And speaking of iframes, I do like to hold my bursts until the pets are all summoned. There isn't really a big advantage to attacking the summoners early because they have such high resistances, and after you defeat their pets, you'll be able to finish them off super quickly anyway. So saving those bursts to iframe the incoming attacks is a much better use of them in my experience. Now let's talk team comps. In the first half, I'm using a pretty standard 4-star Hyper Bloom team. Of course, you can make any 5-star upgrades you have available. Slotting in Nahida in place of the Traveler will probably give you the biggest damage increase here. One other option is to use a strong single target team that has an Electro character in it, such as Raiden National. Even though we don't have Dendro, we can use that approach of destroying the summon constructs and applying Electro to break the invisibility. In the second half, I'm using a Melt Rosaria team. It has a pretty solid grouping and really good AoE damage. I will say this team is a bit of a glass cannon. It is pretty fragile, so if you have a more robust team that can still output decent AoE damage, definitely use that instead. Some non-4-star options that worked pretty well for me on this half was a Kokomi Taser team, as well as a Nahida Burgeon team. And then raising the budget even higher, Hyper Carry Raiden with Zhongli in the flex slot gave me a really consistent clear on this half. In general, Zhongli is kind of a cheat code on this half because he makes surviving so much easier. So if you already have a team that includes Zhongli and deals a decent amount of AoE damage, I definitely recommend using it on this half. Those are all the tips I have to share for this chamber. Hope they help you get at least a little closer to a 3-star clear. The builds will follow shortly after this, and as always, thank you so much for watching.